The Spanish missions were a frontier institution that sought to incorporate indigenous people into the Spanish colonial empire. Its Catholic religion, certain aspects of its Hispanic culture, and through the formal establishment of recognition of sedentary Indian communities, entrusted to the tutelage of missionaries under the protection and control of the Spanish state. The Franciscans who monitored over these missionaries of the missionary colleges in New Spain, establishing the missions in Texas, were expected to closely supervise Native Americans, Indians as they were called, in their assimilation into Christianity and Spanish political and economic practices until the missions were no longer required to have a special status. In the late 1700s, an effort to secularize the churches was underway. The last church in Texas to be secularized would be in 1830. And with that, the command properties were then privatized, and civil life became a purely secular affair. And the direction of the church was then was transferred from missionary religious orders to the Catholic archdiocese. The Cohitacans, which is a generalized term of the numerous groups of Native Americans that lived in this region, they, amongst the Franciscans, along with Franciscans, I should say, came closest to establishing this ideal system among the hundreds of these Indian groups that lived in the region. They had a subsistence of economy of hunting and gathering, but they were weaker militarily than both the Spanish and the more warlike Indians. And very often the Indian mission populations were decreasing because of epidemics and attacks. Along with the Mexican War for Independence, all of these things began to increase pressure for secularization of the mission properties. On our mission tour today, we're going to look at the 5 missions that are along the San Antonio River. They consist of Mission Espada, where we are currently, Mission San Jose, Mission San Juan, Mission Concepcion, and the Alamo, which was originally Mission San Antonio de Valero. The region of Mission San Antonio de Valero would originally be called Villa de San Fernando, which is going to become the seat and the home of what will later become the city of San Antonio. Our first stop on the mission trail today is Mission Espada. It is one of the most southern located missions here in San Antonio. Originally established in East Texas in 1690, it was later moved up here to San Antonio in 1731. Its primary purpose was, much like the rest of the missions that are here in San Antonio, was conversion of Native Americans to Christianity. Its location is very specific because it is up along the San Antonio River, which would allow for agricultural lands and other things to keep the mission prosperous. One of the most significant accomplishments of the Spanish colonial residents of San Antonio was their construction of a complex and expansive irrigation system comprising dams, gates, and irrigation canals. Beginning roughly probably in about 1718, when the first settlers arrived, these systems are known as the acequias, which enabled the missions to thrive and also determine their settlement patterns. The placement also influenced the development of other infrastructure. The term itself was derived from the Arabic word al-sakia, or ditch. Today we would call it the aqueduct, and it runs the length of all 5 missions all the way up through San Antonio Center and the Alamo. All of the missions were located along the San Antonio River so that they could establish the acequias, which also established the waterways that they used between each of the missions in order to ensure the farmland and agricultural needs of each of the missions. So very interestingly, some of these missions, specifically this mission, Espada and Concepcion, are still functioning Catholic churches in their communities. Take note of the design of the doorway into Mission Espada. Those stones were actually misplaced. It is supposed to be more of an arch that would allow for, say, funeral processions to enter in and out very easily. But at the end of the day, that style has resonated throughout San Antonio's history and is actually kind of the symbol of what San Antonio, the city of San Antonio, uses as their logo today.
So, let's do that.
It would have made for a much wider doorway.
Definitely. And they would have actually been able to conduct funerals in here because would have been wide enough for pallbearers to come through. Which now I've seen them conduct funerals, but I mean it's much harder for them to do that now.
Yeah.
They basically have to wheel the casket in because pallbearers can't be on both sides of it.
Right.
And again, like I said, in their defense, it does form, even the botched way forms this barbed quatrefoil look. So the barbed quatrefoil look, again, is that overlapping circles within the square. And it's pretty much part of our iconography here in San Antonio. In fact, the city uses that as our logo here in San Antonio.
We've arrived at Mission San Juan, and you can see the church and the other buildings in the background here. By the time that the original church was erected, they had also created several other buildings on the site, a convent, a granary, some storage facilities, as well as what historians and archaeologists believe to have been very traditional places for Native Americans to live on site, because of course the mission function was to primarily convert Native Americans to Christianity. The stonework around many of the missions has, been preserved and has been kept up throughout the many years that it has been part of the World Heritage Foundation. There are ongoing efforts to ensure that the stonework maintains its viability in order to maintain these national treasures that we have here in San Antonio.
So yeah, we're doing some repointing out here. We're taking out all the old mortar. We were getting a lot of gaps between the rock and mortar. So a lot of water was getting in the wall, saturating and deteriorating everything. So we're chiseling everything out, and then we're putting a softer mortar back that's more breathable.
Okay.
And we're going to fill voids. A lot of the interior of the wall was eroded, so like we were getting like soil at the bottom, and then just empty voids throughout the wall. So we're filling all that, and then yeah, just kind of repointing, and then we'll put a colored mortar that would have been similar to original.
Okay. So this is part of the preservation efforts by the Mission Park Society and such, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're National Park Service employees,
Mm-hmm.
and we started on that end next to the church buildings, and we're just kind of moving our way down.
You have a long way to
so
go.
there's some finished product over there.
I am bilingual ranger William. I am an employee here permanently at Mission San Jose and Mission San Juan, Espada, Concepcion, the Aqueduct, and El Rancho de las Cabras, which are our 6 sites that are part of San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park. There's another, and that would be San Antonio de Valero, better known as the Alamo. I work here as a bilingual ranger, so I do things in both English and Spanish. We have brochures that are bilingual. We also have programming that's bilingual. And we have a number of visitors that come from Spanish-speaking countries. Many of them not English speakers at all, so I'm there to help translate and do that sort of thing.
San Juan, like many of the other missions, goes by a much loftier title, this one being San Juan Capistrano. This mission was purposely put here to facilitate the assimilation of the Native Americans into the Spanish society. Behind me you see Mission San Jose. We're going to venture inside and take a look at it. This specific mission was authorized commission in 1720 to Father Antonio Margil de Jesus. Originally, of course, established for the same purposes as the old missions, conversion of Native Americans to Christianity, as well as assimilation into Spanish society. This mission initially housed about 240 Native Americans. They were Native Americans that didn't want to live at the missions at San Antonio and others because they chose not to live amongst other Native American groups. Initially there was about 240 that lived here. Within about 20 years after an epidemic swept over the area, there was only about 40 of those original Native Americans left. Another interesting fact about Mission San Jose, it's also called the Queen of Missions because it is one of the largest of the missions here in the region. The site itself sits on about 6 acres of land. The stone encampment you see here was primarily used to house the Native Americans that lived within the mission. They were laborers, as well as the soldiers who were considered the Presidio soldiers. That wall encampment is considered the Presidio. Not all missions had a Presidio. Within this Presidio, they did have a convent and other functioning agents to support the mission, and it was the primary mission of the soldiers of the Presidio to protect the mission and its inhabitants, which also meant collecting Native Americans that may have escaped from the mission. As we enter into Mission San Jose, you can see here that they are clearly set up for weekly mass celebration, and this church is a functioning part of the San Antonio Catholic Archdiocese even today. Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción de Acuña Misión, otherwise known as Mission Concepcion, originally established in East Texas in 1716 and moved to San Antonio in 1731. It is the best preserved Spanish mission in Texas. A stone church completed in 1755. It has never fallen into ruin and is considered by some historians to be the oldest unrestored church in the United States. Frescoes can be found in many of the missions. Basically, it's a type of mural painted directly onto wet plaster so that the paint becomes an integral part of the surface finish. This can also be found inside the walls of the Alamo. In 2016, the 5 Spanish colonial missions here in San Antonio, Mission San Antonio de Valero, Mission San Jose, Mission Concepcion, Mission San Juan, and Mission Espada, they've represented the largest concentration of Spanish colonial missions and were named a World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. These 18th century Spanish priests, which established these 5 Catholic missions along the San Antonio River, they created an ethnically diverse society that continues to influence San Antonio to this day. The Alamo. The Alamo conjures up thoughts of great men like Crockett, Travis, Houston, Seguin. But long before the Battle of the Alamo has a very long and rich history. Originally sanctioned in 1716 as San Antonio de Valero mission by Friar Antonio de Olivares, he brought with him American Indian converts and the records from San Francisco Solano Mission near San Juan Bautista on the Rio Grande. This mission was moved to its location due to weather instances that prevented it from being established along the coastline. The mission was built and then rebuilt and reestablished several times. If you look at the other missions, and they have the large bell towers usually on the right and left side, what you know of the Alamo today, that did not exist. That facade on the face of the Alamo was not a prominent fixture like it was with the other missions. Later in 1803, another company of Spanish soldiers are going to occupy the mission. They're a company of Spanish soldiers called the Alamo de Parras, Coahuila, Mexico, which is where this name Alamo is assumed to have come from. It would change hands over time between Spanish colonial forces, Spanish government royal forces, and then later on Mexican government forces, and then later on through the fight for Texas independence and would eventually be housed and occupied by the Army. I've had the opportunity to train as a volunteer at the Alamo and guide visitors and tourists as they come to see the site here in my home city, and it's always a joy. I've also brought my students to the Alamo site on at least one occasion so that they could experience the living historians and the other aspects that the Alamo encourages in the public education and preservation of what is this great establishment that we have here in our city.